We like to think of makeup as something light, something modern, something about self-care. But the true story of makeup is a visceral horror movie. It is a saga of humanity literally rotting its own skin off, poisoning its blood supply, and going permanently blind, all to follow a trend that would be forgotten in 20 years. From the queens of Egypt who lined their eyes with neurotoxic metals, to the Victorian women who swallowed live tapeworms to stay thin, to the radioactive face powder that made your skin glow right before your jaw fell off. This isn't just a history of vanity. This is the history of the extreme psychological lengths we are willing to go to just to be accepted. The scariest part? We haven't really changed. We like to think we're smarter now, but stick around until the end of the video because I'm going to show you how the same deadly patterns are repeating themselves in your bathroom cabinet right now. Welcome to the deadly history of beauty. Let's start where the obsession took its first lethal form, ancient Egypt, 4000 BC. When you think of Egypt, you think of Cleopatra, that heavy, dramatic black eyeliner, the cat eye that defined an entire civilization. It's iconic, but it wasn't just a fashion statement. That black powder was called kohl, and do you know what was in it? Galena, which is the scientific name for lead sulfide. Yes, lead, the heavy metal that we now know causes brain damage, kidney failure, and madness. The Egyptians were grinding it up into a fine dust and applying it directly to their eyelids and tear ducts every single morning. Now, modern scientists have actually tried to defend this. They found that in tiny microscopic amounts, the lead might have stimulated the immune system to fight off eye infections from the bacteria-filled Nile water. But let's be real, they were still painting their faces with a neurotoxin. And it wasn't just the black liner. To get that shimmering green eyeshadow they loved, they used malachite. Malachite is beautiful, but it's a copper carbonate hydroxide. If you get it in your eyes or breathe in the dust while grinding it, it's toxic. And the hair? If an Egyptian woman wanted to dye her hair black, she might use a mixture of boiled blood and crushed horns. But if she wanted to get rid of hair, the recipes involved bird droppings, boiled bat bones, and caustic lime that would literally burn the top layer of her skin off. In Egypt, beauty was godly, and if you had to suffer through chemical burns and lead poisoning to look like a goddess, that was just the price of admission. But if you think that's bad, let's hop across the Mediterranean to ancient Greece and Rome. The Greeks had a very specific and frankly weird beauty standard, the unbrow. In ancient Greece, having two separate eyebrows was seen as a sign of low intelligence and loose morals. If you were a sophisticated woman, your eyebrows had to meet in the middle. If nature didn't give you a unibrow, you had to make one. They would use dark soot to paint the gap, but for a more realistic 3D look, they would use tree resin, basically ancient superglue, to stick goat hair or even patches of mouse skin between their eyes. Imagine being at a fancy Greek banquet, laughing at a joke and having a piece of a dead rat fall into your wine because your eyebrow lost its stickiness. However, the Romans were the ones who truly turned beauty into a biohazard. The Romans were obsessed with white skin. Pale skin was the ultimate status symbol. It proved you were so wealthy you never had to step foot outside to work in the sun. To achieve this ghostly, noble look, Roman women turned to the most dangerous substance available, ceruse. This was a white foundation made by steeping sheets of lead in vinegar. The result was a bright, opaque white paste that covered every blemish. The problem? Lead is absorbed through the skin. Over time, it caused the skin to wither and turn a permanent, sickly grayish yellow. It made their hair fall out and their breath smell like rotting metal. But the irony was the killer. Because the lead was ruining their skin, they had to apply even thicker layers of lead to hide the damage. They were literally mummifying their living faces. To add some healthy color back into their poisoned cheeks, they used fucus, a red dye made from seaweed. But the cheaper versions used red lead or even cinnabar, which is mercury sulfide. Mercury, one of the most deadly substances on the planet. They were painting their lips with mercury and their eyes with lead. It's a miracle the Roman Empire lasted as long as it did, considering the entire upper class was walking around with chronic heavy metal poisoning. And for the skin, they wanted it tight and wrinkle-free. The solution? Crocodile dung. Roman elites would pay a fortune for imported crocodile poop, which they would mix into a paste and smear all over their faces and bodies. They believed the vitality of the animal would transfer to their skin. In reality, they were just inviting parasites and bacterial infections to live on their faces. Now, let's move into the Middle Ages. You might think people stopped caring about makeup because the church was so powerful. And you'd be half right. The church taught that makeup was a sin. They argued that if you improved the face God gave you, you were essentially calling God a bad artist. But did that stop people? Of course not. It just made them weirder. In the Middle Ages, the trend wasn't about the eyes or lips, it was about the forehead. A high, massive, domed forehead was considered the height of intelligence and beauty. Women would actually pluck their hairlines back by 2 or 3 inches to make their forehead look enormous. They would even pluck their eyelashes and eyebrows entirely to make the face look like a blank, pure canvas. To keep their skin pale without using sinful makeup, they would sometimes use leeches to bleed themselves. By intentionally becoming anemic, they achieved that sought-after deathly pallor that made them look like holy saints. But then came the Renaissance, and the deadly factor went from a 1 to a 10. This was the era of the mega-influencer, and no one influenced the world more than Queen Elizabeth I of England. After surviving a bout of smallpox that left her face scarred, Elizabeth became the face of the Mask of Youth. She used the legendary version of Venetian ceruse, the highest quality white lead makeup in the world. She would paint her face, neck, and chest until she looked like a porcelain statue. She didn't wash it off, she would just add a new layer every morning. By the time she was older, she reportedly had an inch-thick crust of lead on her face. Her skin became deeply pitted and gray, her teeth turned black, and she lost almost all of her hair, forcing her to wear massive red wigs, which were also treated with toxic chemicals to keep their color. But Elizabeth wasn't the only victim. There was the tragic case of Maria Gunning, the Countess of Coventry in the 1760s. She was a famous beauty who refused to stop using lead-based makeup even as it clearly began to kill her. Her skin became so corroded that she died at the age of 27. The cause of death on her record? Lead poisoning from her cosmetics. She is literally history's first documented death by makeup celebrity. As we move into the 1700s, the Georgians took things to a level of absurdity that is hard to believe. This was the era of the big hair. Women wore wigs and hairpieces that could be 3 feet tall. These weren't just hair, they were structures. To keep these towers of hair in place, they used a pomade made of lard, yes, pig fat, mixed with flour or starch. Because these styles were so difficult to create, women would leave them in for weeks or even months at a time. The lard would go rancid. It smelled so bad they had to drown it in heavy perfumes. But the worst part? The pig fat and flour attracted roommates. Rats and mice would literally crawl into the wigs while the women were sleeping and build nests inside the hair. Women had to sleep with night cages over their heads to keep the rodents from biting them in their sleep. And because the wigs were covered in dry flour and fat, they were incredibly flammable. There are countless stories of women's heads accidentally catching fire from a stray candle at a ball, turning them into a human torch in seconds. Now, let's enter the Victorian era. This is where the psychology gets truly dark. Queen Victoria hated makeup. She called it vulgar.
So the goal for a woman was to look like she wasn't wearing anything at all. But the beauty standard was the consumptive look. Tuberculosis, or consumption, was a romanticized disease. It made you pale, it made your eyes bright and dilated, and it made your skin translucent. Women who didn't have a terminal illness wanted to look like they did. To get those dreamy, dilated pupils, they used belladonna eye drops. Belladonna is Italian for beautiful woman, but the plant is better known as deadly nightshade. It's a potent poison. These women were literally dropping poison into their eyes every day. It caused heart palpitations, light sensitivity, and eventually permanent blindness. But as the saying went, one must suffer to be beautiful. And the skin? Since they couldn't use thick white paint anymore, they went internal. They started eating arsenic complexion wafers. Arsenic is a famous poison used for killing rats and unfaithful husbands, but in small doses it destroys red blood cells, which gives you that pure, deathly white skin. Of course, once you started eating arsenic, you couldn't stop. If you stopped, your skin would erupt in boils and turn black, so you had to keep eating the poison until your organs eventually gave up. If you weren't poisoning yourself with arsenic, you were probably hosting a parasite. The Victorian tapeworm diet involved swallowing a pill containing the egg of a beef tapeworm. The worm would hatch in your gut and grow to be 20 or 30 feet long, eating all your nutrients so you could stay thin while eating whatever you wanted. The danger wasn't just malnutrition, it was the fact that the worm could grow so large it would cause intestinal blockages or even crawl back up your esophagus and suffocate you. By the time we hit the early 1900s, you'd think science would have stepped in to stop the madness. Instead, science just provided more creative ways to die. In 1898, Marie Curie discovered radium. It was a miracle element. It glowed. It was full of energy. So naturally, the beauty industry put it in everything. A brand called Radia became a massive hit in Paris. They sold radioactive lipstick, face powder, and soap. They claimed the radium would stimulate the cellular life and give you a permanent glow. And it did, but not the kind you want. Then there were the radium girls, factory workers who painted watch dials with radioactive paint. They were told the paint was harmless, so they used to paint their teeth and fingernails with it to surprise their boyfriends in the dark. Their jaws eventually rotted away, their bones became honeycombed with holes, and they died in excruciating pain.
But perhaps the most modern horror story from this time was the tricho system. In the 1920s, a doctor realized that X-rays caused hair to fall out. So he opened a chain of beauty clinics where women could sit in front of an X-ray machine for minutes at a time to permanently remove their leg and facial hair. There was no pain, no smell, just magic. 10 to 20 years later, these women started developing horrific facial ulcers, thick, leathery skin, and aggressive carcinomas. Thousands of women were disfigured or killed by X-ray hair removal before it was finally banned. Even as recently as the 1930s, the beauty industry was still blindsiding people, literally. In 1933, a product called Lash Lure hit the market. It was the first permanent mascara and eyelash dye, but instead of safe pigments, it used a chemical called p-phenylenediamine. It caused such a violent allergic reaction in some women that their eyelids swelled shut, their skin ulcerated, and in several documented cases, their eyeballs literally melted, leaving them permanently blind. One woman even died from a systemic infection caused by the dye. This one product was so horrific that it actually helped lead to the creation of the FDA in the United States. So, we've reached the modern day. We can laugh at the Roman crocodile poop and the Victorian tapeworms. We can feel sorry for the radium girls. But are we really safer? Today, the beauty industry is a multi-billion-dollar machine, and it still relies on our willingness to ignore the fine print. In the last decade, high-profile lawsuits have revealed that some of the world's most famous talc-based powders contained traces of asbestos, a known carcinogen. We found forever chemicals, or PFAS, in waterproof mascaras and long-wear lipsticks. These chemicals don't leave your body. They build up in your liver and kidneys, just like the lead did in ancient Rome. And look at our modern procedures. We inject botulinum toxin, the most deadly acute toxin known to man, into our foreheads to paralyze our muscles. We inject synthetic fillers that can migrate to other parts of our bodies, or accidentally get injected into an artery causing skin necrosis or blindness. We undergo Brazilian butt lifts, the surgical procedure with the highest mortality rate in the world. History has taught us one undeniable thing. Beauty is a cult of pain. Humans are the only animals on this planet that will voluntarily poison, cut, starve, and burn themselves just to fit an imaginary ideal. We haven't stopped doing it. We've just traded the lead for plastic and the arsenic for toxins. So, the next time you look in the mirror and feel like you need to fix something, remember Queen Elizabeth. Remember Maria Gunning. Remember the Radium Girls. Your face isn't a project to be solved with chemicals, it's a living part of you. In 100 years, people will probably look back at our Botox and our chemical peels and say, "Can you believe they did that? It was barbaric." The most beautiful thing you can be is healthy, and the most dangerous thing you can be is someone who's willing to die for a trend. If you're glad your eyebrows aren't made of mouse skin, hit that like button. And if you want to know more about the terrifying secrets history tried to hide, check out this video over here. Subscribe for more deep dives into the dark side of history. Stay safe and stay beautiful, naturally.